So this is Shenzhen I. It's a game where you work for a cheap Japanese electronics company, and basically this is a circuit board for some sort of laser tag vest or something similar. It has a few inputs and outputs. There's a hit input, which happens when the player is hit with another laser. It has a respawn input, which happens after amount of time, either after the device is turned on or the player's been hit. You have your trigger input, which happens when the player pulls the trigger. The reload, the ammo account needs to refresh, and then the fire output, which needs to only happen if the player is alive and has ammo. So a few interesting things happen in this test, and so yeah, here we go. The first thing that happens is the player pulls the trigger even though he is not alive yet. So what happens is this controller checks to see if there's been a reload, which there has not. So it goes to check to see if there's been a trigger pull. So what this is saying is P1, which is this input, is that equal to 100? Well, right now it is. So it's going to execute this grayed out command right here, which now it's saying is ACC greater than 0. Now ACC is my ammo count, and that's just a convenient abbreviation. It's just basically a storage, an integer storage, and so the player has not initiated the reload command, and we'll see what happens in a minute when he does that. But right now, since this is not greater than 0, it's just going to skip all that, and it's going to go to the bottom. Boom. Nothing happens. So nothing's happening over here. This is checking to see if we've been hit or respawned or anything like that, and nothing like that's happening. So we're going to skip on up until we do actually get respawned, and you'll see the 100 signal coming from the respawn input here. And the first thing this controller does is check to see if we've been respawned. Since we have been respawned, it's gonna execute these conditional commands here. First thing it does, it's gonna move our little read hand up to the first slot in the RAM. Boom, there we go. Now what it's gonna do, it's gonna write that 100 to that spot in the RAM, letting us store that alive state. And like, I could do that with this memory, but then I wouldn't be able to access it with these other controllers. So we're just using the one slot of the RAM to store whether we're alive or not. And so it's gonna write that to that, and then it's going to check and see if we've been hit. We haven't been hit, so it's going to skip that. Now it needs to read that back off the RAM and send it over here to this controller, which is going to basically hold that alive state and relay that to the output here. So you click forward, it goes through. Now this one is starting to read. It sees that 100 signal that we sent from the RAM, and it's going to store it right here. It sends a 100 signal out to the live, and you'll see the player come alive right there. So now we're in the alive state. We go up, the player pulls the trigger 2 more times, and he is alive now, but he still doesn't have ammo, so it's just going to skip most of those commands. And then right here we get a reload. You see the reload signal come in, and the first thing this controller does is check to see if there's been a reload, and there has. So it's gonna execute this conditional command here. Move the value from this port into our ACC, and this value is going to be a 5 set by this dial. Boom, we see the 5 go into the ammo account. Now it's going to check and see if there's been a trigger pull. There hasn't. It's just going to, and now it's going to skip to the end. We wait for the rest of our stuff to catch up over here. Very inefficient programming, like I said. And you see that there's been a reload, and now our ammo count's at 5. So the trigger has been pulled, and we have ammo, and we're alive. So this is the first time this has happened. So we should get a fire signal. So what happens is that we check to see if there's been a reload. There's not. We check to see if the trigger's been pulled. It has. So now it checks to see if we have ammo. We do. So it moves on to the next command, which is to subtract 1 from that account. Boom. Our ammo is now down to 4. We've pulled the trigger. The gun's registered that we pulled the trigger, and it's used one of our ammo. It's going to move. Now, it's going to, since we've passed that little test, it's going to take that 100 signal and move it over to this controller. And this controller's been sleeping the whole time. It's going to wake up now since it's got a signal. And it's going to check to see if we're alive. So it'll moves the hand up there, and we pass the test. It says is this input equal to 100, and it was. So now it's going to take that 100 and from X3 move X3 to P0. So it's going to take that input that's in X3 and it's going to move it to P0. Boom. Now we got 100 going into our fire. We're going to move down. We're going to send a 0 back to here, and I'll explain that in a minute. Just wait for everything to catch up. We send the signal, and then I clear it out with a 0 on the next step there. So so the 100 signal doesn't continue like it does over here. So here we go. Pulls the trigger again, get a fire signal. Pulls the trigger again, gets a fire signal. Pulls the trigger again, pulls the trigger again. Fire signal, fire signal. And here he pulls it, and he's out of ammo. So you don't. It's not going to pass the signal on to even check and see if he's alive. Doesn't matter because he doesn't have any ammo. And here's where he gets hit. We see the hit signal. The second command here is to check and see if we've been hit. We have. So what that does is it moves our little writer up to the first slot there, and it's going to put a 0 in that slot saying your health is gone from 100 to 0. It's 0 now. So then it's going to take that 0, move it down to my other controller here. Now this controller has woken up. It's going to wait. It's going to read that signal. It's 0. It's going to relay that signal to the alive. The alive has a 0 signal now, and you'll see that the player is dead now. 0. So he's dead. Here you get a reload signal. You know how the reload works. Goes through, reload. Even though he's dead, he can still reload. And then here's where he fires when he's dead, and this is kind of the hack job. I had to come up with this. What I do is, since it passed the test, we have ammo, and the code was to remove an ammo and send the signal. That's what this box does. It says, hey, yeah, I got ammo and the trigger's been pulled, so let's send that signal out and check and see if we're alive. So it sends the signal. This guy wakes up, checks to see if we're alive. It looks to this slot in the RAM, but it doesn't see 100. It only sees a 0. So what it does is it skips that code that would have moved that 100 down here, and it moves it back, and it's going to send it back to this controller, which is going to read that test X2 for 100, and if that happens, it's going to add 1 back to the ammo. So it basically refunds the ammo. And that's why I had to send that 0 signal earlier, was because if I didn't send some type of signal on every cycle, it would get hung up and it wouldn't do anything. But anyway, so it refunds the ammo, and it continues. And then he pulls the trigger again. Like I said, you'll see the ammo go down. The ammo goes down, sends the signal out. It says, hey, we're not alive. You can have your ammo back. Adds the ammo back to the count again. Because the first time I did this, he was 2 shots short right here. I wasn't able to get a fire signal on these last 2, because he had used them over here. But anyway, that's pretty much it. That basically covers all the conditions that could happen, and all the tests, all 80 of the tests run, go off without a hitch, and I get a nice little crappy score on this. So got some improving to do, but you know, it works. So